Wow, what a season. It's been 84 years, but we're finally at the end of season 13 of RuPaul's Drag Race. I know this season has gotten a lot of flack from fans, but I genuinely loved this season. It's been one of the seasons called out the most for its riggory by the fandom, so in today's video, we're going to take a look at each episode along with the queens' performances and see just how rigged this season was. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone who took part in my poll for this season. I got over 400 responses, and that's the most I've ever gotten. Your response to the polls helped a ton with this video. It also taught me that if it were up to you guys, Rosé and Denali would be in the top every single week. So maybe I should just call this video the rigging of Denali and Rosé. JK, Ka, Mora. Let's get into the riggory of Drag Race, Season 13. But first, make sure you are following me on social media, my Instagram, my Twitter, and we are 10 patrons away from my second goal on Patreon. The Discord is officially launched. Come hang out and join the Patreon family. Now, like we always do, let's take a look at the cast as a whole. There are some heavy hitters on this cast right from the jump. Both Gottmik and Tina Burner were huge names coming into the season. Gottmik is a celebrity makeup artist who had created a huge name for themselves before even getting on the show, and Tina Burner was a huge name in NYC. I've known about Tina for years, so those two automatically come into the competition with big legacies to live up to. We also have kind of a very special instance here of three queens being the drag sisters of popular season 12 contestants. Rosé is in Stephanie's Child with Jan, Simone is part of the House of Avalon with Gigi Good, and Candy Muse is the drag daughter of Aja and drag sister of Dahlia Sin. Candy especially had a huge following before the season, but all of these queens had pretty big fan bases coming in due to their connections to other Ru girls. Now, taking a look at these 5 queens I just mentioned, all 5 of them make the top 7, and the entire top 4 is made up of them. Now, if you want another great video about Season 13's behind-the-scenes riggory, check out this video by Bossy Queen. I'm going to echo some of the things that they talk about in their video, and they really just hit the nail on the head. Now, the episode that fans ripped apart from the moment it aired, the Sync Smackdown premiere. Of the 7 queens that lose their initial lip sync, only 2 make it to the top 6, with the other 5 being taken out basically one by one as the season begins, with the exception of LaLa Ri being one of the winners to be an early out. Now, what was the point of this episode? Was it something new to try? A gaggy moment for TV drama? Or were the producers trying to find out each queen's lip sync abilities so that they could more easily strategize who to put in the bottom against each other later in the season? Now, there's not really an answer. It's probably all 3, to be honest. But at the end of the day, I don't really see any riggory in this episode. I think everyone that wins deserved to win, but there are 2 lip syncs that I want to highlight moving forward. First is LaLa Ri versus Denali. Now, Denali is the only queen this season to outlast the queen who beat her in the premiere lip sync. It was a pretty evenly matched lip sync, but Denali's outfit sort of falls apart during it, so it makes sense as to why LaLa Ri wins. But I don't think I'm crazy in thinking that if Denali had prepared a better look, she probably would have won, since we see later on, Lala was never a contender in Ru's eyes, whereas Denali was. We also have Gottmik versus Utica. Now, this is the most, lackluster lip sync of the episode. Maybe it was the song choice, maybe it was the performers, but either way, Gottmik wins. Not because she did great, she just did better than Utica. Spoiler alert, but we're going to see a lot of rigging for Gottmik this season. I think the producers saw lip syncing was not in Gottmik's wheelhouse, and throwing her in the bottom would probably lead to her going home, as this season is full of lip sync assassins. So that is just something to note from this episode. Other than that, I don't really have any more notes on episode 1, so let's jump into where the real competition begins with episode 2, Condragulations. This episode, we see all of the queens who lost their lip syncs vote off a queen. And then she comes right back in. I think that this was the first big mistake of the season. It makes the whole first episode feel pointless. If Elliot had went home, it would have been a gag, but her coming back literally 2 minutes later just makes everything that's happened up to this point feel so pointless. Regardless, Elliot joins the winners to do 2 runway looks and a performance to congratulations. I've mentioned this in previous rigged videos, but the first few episodes usually don't have much rigging. I think producers like to see who naturally rises to the top right off the bat. Simone and Olivia win this challenge, and Simone wins the lip sync. Everything checks out. Gottmik and Candy are given negative critiques, and this is important as Gottmik is only ever given 1 more negative critique the entire season. Since there's no bottom placements in this episode, giving her these critiques does not risk her place in the competition whatsoever. We have the much better episode where the Losers Club performs Phenomenon, and they completely show up the winners, which seems like a potential storyline forming where the losers come back and prove that they are competitors and take out the winners. But nope, that doesn't happen, and they all go home right off the bat, except for Denali and Rosé, who are the winners of this episode. And it sets up a pretty great comeback story for both of them. I would say of all the losers, these are the only 2 they do much with storyline-wise about starting off losing the first episode. Now, imagine a season where Denali, Rosé, Tamisha, and Utica claw their way to the end, taking out all the winners who thought they were hot shit, but instead, basically after Lala's elimination, the storyline of the winners versus the losers is dropped, and it is basically never brought up again. So, alright. Before we get into episode 3, I want to mention 2 more storylines that I think were potentially going to be great, but kind of go nowhere. And they both involve our Bonnie Lass Rosé. A lot of complaints about Rosé is that she just didn't have much storyline all season, besides having a crush on Denali and wanting to win. But the very first episode sets up 2 potentially interesting and dramatic story arcs for her that go absolutely nowhere. And that's with Olivia Lux and Tina Burner. Olivia is pretty new to drag, and Rosé is visibly very furious when Olivia sends her to the Pork Chop Lounge episode 1. I thought this would be setting up a feud between the 2 where Rosé tries to prove she's top dog, while Olivia tries to prove she's good at drag despite being so new to it. But basically after episode 1, it's dropped and never heard of again. And then Tina Burner tells us episode 1 that her and Rosé aren't necessarily besties. Rosé's reaction to hearing Tina in the competition also hints at this, and I thought we were going to get a rivalry between 2 of New York's fiercest performers. That would have been badass. But, besides a couple mentions here and there, we get nothing. It seems later on producers were maybe trying to continue this storyline when Tina and Rosé are partnered for the makeover, but nothing really comes out of that either. I don't know if there was more content here that was cut, maybe to make Rosé look better to audiences since she's a finalist, but I was very disappointed these 2 storylines went absolutely nowhere. But let's get back to the actual competition. Episode 4 is the RuPaul Movie Acting Challenge, and can I just say, I loved this challenge. It was so smart, and so many queens did well. It also had one of the best runways of the entire season right off the bat. This episode gagged me, and this is top tier Drag Race. I don't really see any rigging this episode either. Maybe Olivia could have been in the top over Candy. Maybe Lala could have lip synced over Denali. But we get to see Denali in 100% pure love, so I'm not really complaining. The top 3 of this episode all make the finale. Maybe that's a coincidence, maybe it's not. Just thought I'd point it out. This is one of my favorite episodes of Drag Race ever. It's just so good. Episode 5 is the Bag Ball, and people were pretty torn on who should have won this episode between Gottmik and Utica. The poll I put out had Utica winning, but I'm Team Gottmik, and I know a lot of other people are too, for the win here. But friends, there's no way they weren't going to give the fashion queen of the season the win in the ball, even if Utica's final runway look was much better than Gottmik's. This is the first episode where we see the judges maybe not living for Utica's kooky personality, and she is read for being too silly on the runway when her looks were actually very couture. This is another episode where a lot of the queens do amazing. Utica, Gottmik, Rosé, Denali, Olivia, Candy, Elliott, they all had at least 2 amazing looks. This was a very strong ball, and I thought it was a bit odd they picked Rosé to be in the top for the second week in a row, rather than picking someone who hadn't had a moment to shine yet, but her top placement was still justified. Lala and Joey are put in the bottom, and both of them had looks that were total flops, so yeah, no Riggory, we're all good to go. Episode 6 is the Disco Mentory Challenge, and it's yet another one that so many queens knock out of the park. Olivia is the obvious standout, but Tina, Rosé, Denali, Lala, Elliott, they all do incredible. Notice how the 2 high placements here are the 2 queens who have yet to be critiqued. They were justified, but I do think Rosé and Denali did great too. I think Rosé actually deserved to be in the top in this episode, rather than the 2 previous episodes she was high for, but whatever. Tina Burner was a huge standout though. I mean, wow, this is my favorite performance of Tina's for the entire season. This is also our first instance of rigging in Gottmik's favor. She dropped more moves than any other queen, and if they're gonna call out Candy for having a look that didn't read disco, Gottmik's looked less disco to me than Candy's did. Gottmik 100% should have been in the bottom this episode, and in the poll I put out, you all voted her as the worst of the challenge. So why was she saved? 1, because we know she's not the best lip syncer, and to put her in the bottom with Candy, which is definitely what should have happened, Candy 100% would have won. But also because Tamisha was a very tempting queen to put in the bottom with Candy. They just had a huge fight the week prior in Untucked, and obviously did not like each other, so seeing one send home the other would be a huge payoff for that storyline. But I actually think sending Tamisha home here cut that storyline short. I would have loved to see them continue to interact and bicker following that fight. Tamisha dropped 1 move, but I definitely don't think she should have been in the bottom, maybe low at the very least. Her look in this challenge though, like, wow, she is the moment, come on now. Utica gets red and put in the bottom 3 for giving her kooky personality throughout the challenge, and this was called out in the previous episode, so now we see the judges really don't care for what Utica is presenting, so keep that in mind. Now we get to episode 7, which is Bossy Rossi. Now, this episode made me raise my very prominent brow a little bit. Candy was called out for being in the top by fans, and I have to agree. She did a pretty good example of a safe performance. Not outstanding, not bad, just fine. There were plenty of much better performers in this challenge than her. Rosé, Denali, Gottmik. I actually think Gottmik should have won with Olivia here. Their performances relied on each other to do well, and I thought they both did an amazing job. So I was a little surprised to see Mick only safe. Going back to Candy, I definitely think the reason she was in the top is due to her bottom placement the previous episode. It's obvious the producers loved her, as she was the only one left making any sort of drama, so she had to be in the bottom 2 the previous week for storyline, but I'm sure producers wanted her to bounce right back and be a contender moving forward. Utica, Elliott, and Lala were the bottom 3, and they all did pretty bad, but I do think Lala did the least bad of the 3, but at this point, it was Lala's 3rd time in the bottom 3, and she had yet to have like a standout moment, so I think they were okay with losing her and Elliott compared to Utica, who at least was giving amazing runways. So we lose our first member of the winner circle, but like I said, I don't think she would have been there if producers really had anything to say about it. Now we have the Russical, which was just cringy, but there were some pretty good performances. Olivia and Utica stood out in their roles. Denali and Gottmik were amazing as the Russian hackers, but those are the kind of roles that were made to be in the top. Rosé is given the win, and it's made to sound like this is her like breakout moment. I guess they're forgetting about her 3 top placements so far. Michelle calls this out in her What Ya Packin' too. Everyone acts like Rosé sucked the first half of the competition, only to blossom midway through, but I really don't know why they're pushing this narrative unless they really just didn't want to crown her and wanted to diminish how well she actually did. Now here's one of the most confusing placements of the entire season. Tina Burner in the bottom 3. Tina had the 2nd best performance in this musical, And fans were shocked that she was negatively critiqued for not lip syncing her death for like 2 seconds. After slaying everything she had previously, Tina was the main character in this Russical, and she was outstanding. I think maybe because in some of the previous comedy challenges, like the RuPaul Mark Acting Challenge and Bossy Rossi, she didn't do super well, and definitely was not living up to her name as the comedy queen of NYC. They gave up on her. Either she gets a top placement here and lots of positive feedback, or they pull her in the bottom and revoke any chance of her being a contender moving forward. And well, they went with the latter. Tina got a lot of hate this season for her runways, but I do think with this challenge and the Discomentary challenge, she proved that she is a force to be reckoned with. It just made me sad seeing her be torn to shreds after giving such an amazing performance. Now, the bottom two here confuses the hell out of me too, not because they didn't deserve it. I'm just shocked production let their two favorites fall into the bottom this early in the competition, especially when a queen like Elliott, who obviously was not going to go much farther, did a pretty mediocre job in this Rusical. In the poll, she was ranked as the third worst, which I agree with, but they easily could have thrown her in the bottom and let one of either Candy or Simone send her home. But instead, they actually let them both lip sync. I mean, neither go home. I was just shocked that they actually let this happen so early. Now, a lot of people credit this lip sync as production saving of Candy Muse, but to this day, people argue over who won this lip sync. So maybe it wasn't the showiest of lip syncs or gag worthy, but there's enough discourse over who won that I think it makes sense that this would be a double save. I ran a poll on my Instagram, and Candy won by only 8%. So overall, kind of a confusing episode, but whatever. Let's move on to Snatch Game. Here we have Utica's comedy really not resonating with people, and she's finally thrown in the bottom for it. And we also have Elliott basically give up in this episode, while also serving one of the worst looks of all time. Now, the thing about this episode that got people really upset was that Simone was not in the top. With her hilarious Harriet Tubman and deeply moving runway, she seemed like a lock for top 3, so people were pretty confused when she was called safe. I've mentioned this before, but I think that she was just safe because it would have been hard to not give her the win if she was in the top. Gottmik did amazing and completely deserved her win, but Simone's runway, along with her performance, would be hard to say, yeah, you're safe too, and not give the win after probably giving it such good critiques. So by calling her safe, but calling it out the importance of her runway, Ru and the producers were acknowledging her without having to pass her up as the winner next to Gottmik. I hope that makes sense. I think the same thing happened to Monique Hart on season 10. Mayhem was going to win that episode, hands down. And by putting Monique in the top, it would highlight just how great she really did. But keeping her just safe kind of minimizes her performance so that it doesn't seem crazy that Mayhem won. Now, this isn't exactly the same since I do think Gottmik did the best in the Snatch Game, but it's kind of the same premise. And now comes the Makeover Challenge, the episode that had fans all across the globe calling Riggory, robbed, boycott the show, send all of the death threats. Now, I want to say that in the parameters that were set for the judging of this episode, everything played out pretty fair. This challenge was judged in pairs. The right pair won, the right pair lost. But judging in pairs was not very fair, as we saw the correct bottom two came from different pairs. And the queen who should have been just low under regular circumstances went home. But unfair doesn't necessarily mean rigged. I actually think putting Rosé and Tina in the bottom to save Denali would have been more Riggory, as Rosé did the best out of the 4. But seeing Denali, who had been slaying most of the season, be put in the bottom despite not doing the worst, and then sashaying away, looking a hot-ass mess, not even in her own drag, was heartbreaking, since we knew how much she wanted to win. That was her main story arc of the season. This episode divides me. I do think it was unfair that Tina didn't lip sync, and she did the worst out of everyone in the episode. But the way it was judged also makes complete sense, as they were working in teams, so they should be judged as teams. But then again, they also did each other's makeovers completely separate, so I don't know. I also do want to highlight that the one episode that Utica won all season is the one that she was acting as somebody else. Oof. So I'm just going to leave this episode as a question mark. I see why it's unfair, but it's not rigged either. It's just really sad we had to see Denali leave like this. But hey, it sets up a great storyline for her when she goes on All Stars. So let's move on to episode 11. We have the soda commercial challenge. Ew, I had to say soda. And this episode was clearly made to get Tina Burner out from the very start. Olivia, Utica, and Gottmik all did worse than Tina. Gottmik did the worst out of anyone, but she's saved for the second time this season from lip syncing. I think Tina had to go this episode because if you look at the next two episodes, they're a roast and an acting challenge. Two things Tina excels at. This would potentially be the last chance to get rid of Tina before the finale, and the producers took that chance. Tina had both a pretty decent runway and a pretty decent commercial, and then literally won the lip sync, but she goes home. I know everyone hates Tina Burner, but we can all agree of every queen this season, she had the most unfair elimination. This just proves that you're only ever considered robbed if you're a fan favorite. Rosé and Simone both win this week, and a lot of fans had a problem with that, saying that Rosé should have won solo. I actually preferred Simone's commercial to Rosé's, but I thought they both deserved it, and their runways were both iconic and incredible, so yeah, I'm cool with this. Episode 12, we have The Roast, and this episode is the culmination of the season-long story arc of no one understands Utica's humor. She gets reaped through the coals this entire episode and sachets away, but it's totally justified, just super hard to watch. I actually thought Gottmik could have potentially won this episode, but Candy also did an incredible job and didn't have a win at this point, so I see it for her. They also put Simone, who is the front runner at this point, in the bottom for a second time. Again, totally deserved. I'm just shocked they did it. I think maybe producers saw how people turned so fast on her drag sister Gigi Good in season 12. Gigi was also the front runner of that season, but was saved when she deserved to be in the bottom two. And Simone is still pretty universally loved, so see producers? Giving queens a fair track record works out in the end. Our final elimination of the season is Olivia Lux in that weird acting challenge. I think basically everyone did great in this challenge besides Olivia, so the fact that they chose Candy to put in the bottom just shows how much they really loved the other three. Gottmik, I also thought could have won this. I don't know, Gottmik really pile-drived the last few episodes. Olivia had been struggling in the last 5, so it was definitely her time to go, and that leaves us with our top 4. I know everyone says that Candy was favored all season, but really the only time I thought any of her placements were rigged was her one high placement in Bossy Rossi. Gottmik, I think, was the most favored, being saved from the bottom 2 twice throughout the season. But I also thought there were challenges that she could have been given the win if they wanted to push her more, so she kind of has an odd track record. Rosé comes into the finale with the best track record, never lip-syncing for her life, and never deserving to either. It's just weird how in the last episode and in her Whatcha Packin', they're really trying to downplay how good her track record is. I really get the vibe, and a lot of people on social media have been pointing this out too, that producers do not want to crown her. RuPaul is basically screaming praises at Candy, Mick, and Simone, and then it's just like, oh yeah, Rosé, you're here too. I think it goes back to the fact that Rosé had no real storylines all season long, just basically wanting to win being her only material. Like I said, maybe some of her material with Olivia or Tina was cut, but besides doing well in challenges, Rosé didn't have nearly the same impact as the other 3 had on the season. Gottmik had a season-long story arc of dealing with their gender dysphoria at first, then starting to come into her own and surprising herself with how well she was doing. Candy was the source of drama all season, but we get to see her soft side too and learn a lot about her life, like the fallout of the House of Aja, her being bullied as a kid, her family. Candy is the most fully fleshed character out of this season. And then we have Simone, who also tells us a lot about her family, growing up queer and black, and even her time in high school. But what do we know about Rosé except that she's in Stephanie's Child, which also is barely brought up? I'm sure Rose had plenty of things to tell us about her life. They just chose not to show any of them. And I think that's what's led to the fandom being so split on her, with half rooting for her as the frontrunner and the other half saying she's missing the it factor. Rose definitely has the it factor. The show just did not want to highlight it. And it seems obvious now looking back at the season as a whole. Overall, I think the season was a lot less rigged than it seems. I've definitely covered seasons with a whole lot more rigging, namely seasons 11 and 12, and even UK2. The biggest examples of rigging, in my opinion, are saving Gottmik from the bottom in both the Discomentary and the commercial challenges, and Tina Burner being sent home in the commercial challenge. That episode was a mess. Whew. Also, I just want to point out that in the reunion, we see a rematch between Denali and Lala, with Denali winning, and this just supports my theory that producers were probably banking on her winning that first episode lip sync. They really gave Denali a whole lot of material for a queen that barely made it halfway. I definitely smell all-stars in her future. I think this season will hold up better on a rewatch than upon first watch. I mean, 16 episodes is a lot, and with 5 whole episodes that no one goes home in, it did feel like the season was dragging on at times. But after the double save, the season kind of picks up speed and, in my opinion, cemented itself as a top-tier season. There was so many episodes that had half the cast or more serving amazing performances. I mean, The Ball, the Discomentary, Bossy Rossi. I think zipping through the whole thing in a rewatch would be a much better viewing experience. And with it airing alongside the incredible thing that is UK2, I think there was a lot going against this season. But in my opinion, I think it's great and definitely a season I want to rewatch. It has its rigging moments, but unlike a lot of seasons, I don't think it's bogged down by it. But tell me your thoughts. What do you think was the most rigged moment of the season, and which queen do you think was helped and hurt the most by rigging? Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, make sure to subscribe to this channel, put on notifications, and check out my social media. It has been a long day of solving the mystery of where did all of Joey J's wigs go. I'll see you guys in the next one.